Good morning and welcome to Optimum Solutions webinar about termination and severance pay. My name is Susan Warren and I'll be your presenter today, and Sherry Dwyer is also with us. We're going to talk to you about, well, not the most cheerful things that payroll professionals have to deal with, but nonetheless something that you must know details about. Here's our agenda for the day. We're going to look at federal and state laws related to termination pay and severance pay. We'll look at why your company should establish policies directly related to departing employees. We'll look at some details of both severance pay and termination pay and discuss the similarities and differences, some of which involve deductions, COBRA, and HIPAA involved in job loss. We'll talk about downsizing and what happens when there are involuntary separations because of plant closings or layoffs. And we're going to look at some really exciting, no one ever said, charts of deadlines that govern when you must deliver the final pay to employees who are either involuntarily or voluntarily separating from your employment, because those deadlines are different for involuntary terminations and voluntary resignations. Now, those charts may not be exciting, but they are very important. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at those charts. Sometimes when employees leave, it's not pleasant, but sometimes it's not so bad. Have you ever had one that entertained you on the way out? Watch this.
Excuse me, everybody. Derek, Jake, everyone. I got an announcement to make, and I got my friends here to help me out. Guys, hit it. I am quitting a job today. I'm leaving. And started my coffee shop. I am moving on. Got to go, got to go, got to go. Why I'm thinking so. Yeah, I am quitting this job today.
Okay, well, it looks like my internet got interrupted there a little bit, but what he's saying is I'm quitting this job today, I'm moving on, and I am gone. I am leaving. So wouldn't it be great if all terminations went that way? They could just entertain you as they walked out the door. They don't all go that way, and we all know that. So actually, before we get started on the legal do's and don'ts, I want to take just a minute to speak to your compassionate side. While all employees exiting don't go like the guy singing on his way out in a tuxedo, when an employee leaves, that process should be as painless as possible for everyone involved. Best practice does not call for outrageous deductions or vengeful tactics. If there are strained relations, and everyone knows that sometimes there are strained relations at terminations, be the bigger party and exhibit your professional best image. This is just another opportunity to brand yourself, and retaliation is not how you want to be remembered. And besides, speaking of legal do's and don'ts, the Fair Labor Standards Act says that you can't take an employee's pay below federal minimum wage anyhow. So if you're only paying someone for a few hours on that last check, don't worry about deductions too much, because the law might not permit them anyway. Also, be sure you know your state minimum wage here too, because state laws may come into play. For a salaried employee, an exempt employee's final pay can be prorated if they did not work a full pay period. And we're going to look at it in detail in a little bit, but while FLSA just says that you have to issue final pay by the employee's next regular pay date, state laws actually have a lot to say on the deadlines about when you issue that final pay. While FLSA does not have anything to say about whether an employer must pay unused PTO, you do need to look up your state rules. For example, California says that you must pay accrued PTO in the final check, but ignorance is no defense if you violate state laws, and those fines can really add up. And one way to avoid incurring those penalty risks where termination and severance are involved is to lay out your company policy in writing. Check with your states and find out what you must do, and then decide what you want to do optionally. For example, if you're not in California, will you pay for unused PTO? If you have exempt employees who don't work a full pay period, will you prorate and only pay them for the portion they worked? Or will you pay for the full pay period? You may not want to actually publish details about severance pay in your company handbook. That doesn't exactly make for happy reading. But it's a good idea to have a plan about severance pay. Severance is often based on length of employment, something like so much for every year of service or something like that. Severance pay is a matter of agreement between an employer and an employee. Severance pay is not the employee's final paycheck for the last work period. It is a payment over and above what you are liable to pay for work performed. Severance is offered to employees who were terminated through no fault of their own. Severance pay is taxable for all federal taxes, but check your state taxes. For federal income tax, severance pay does qualify as supplemental wages. Along with an offer of severance, an employer might also ask an employee to sign a release. Now, that release could be a release of claims that the ex-employee might make against the employer. And there are different types of releases for individuals and groups. And since you all know that I am not a labor attorney, and I don't even play one on TV, I am not going to attempt to explain those differences to you, but I will tell you that they exist. And if you need to know more about that topic, you should seek legal counsel. There are several different types of severance pay, and they include lump sum, where one large payment is made to the separated employee, or salary continuation. And this would be where the separated employee is, for all intents and purposes, still on the payroll, just like your active employees. However, in this case, remember to remove the state unemployment tax codes from these employees, because you shouldn't have state unemployment tax codes on terminated or separated employees. Periodic payments might be another type of severance pay, where multiple checks may be issued to the separated employee, breaking up severance into smaller bits over a longer period of time. And you may have some different rules that apply to employees who have been severed or separated. For example, stock options might have different rules that apply. Employees who have been terminated for just cause usually forfeit options to purchase shares at the set price. And generally, the employee's right to exercise stock options ends or is at least limited with termination. If you pay and terminate employees in the states of Oregon, Rhode Island, and Tennessee, state law says that you must pay accrued vacation pay at termination, unless termination was the result of misconduct. But check with legal counsel before you withhold a lot of deductions on this pay. Remember our opening discussion about compassion and best practices, calling for keeping away from vengeful tactics. Try to keep the termination process as amicable as possible. Since federal law does not directly address severance pay, there are no rules about how to calculate it or when it's due. However, there is an agency called the Employee Benefits Security Administration, or EBSA, who can assist employees who did not receive severance pay that was required in an employment contract. So make sure that you are living up to your end of any contracts that you may be party to. That's a little bit about severance pay. So let's talk now about termination pay. Termination pay. Termination can be either voluntary or involuntary, and termination pay is the last paycheck due to the employee for the last work that they performed. But there's more to termination pay than just paying the employee. You also have to notify all of the other parties that might get paid when the employee gets paid, like any child support state disbursement units or garnishment payees, tax levy agencies, the 401k administrator, And you have to instruct the employee about how they can move their 401k monies to an IRA or a different 401k if they want to. You have to instruct the employee regarding COBRA and how they and their eligible dependents can elect to participate in COBRA. Both COBRA and HIPAA information need to be provided to terminated employees, and there's standard information to be shared for each. I think you're probably all familiar with those. COBRA, of course, gives ex-employees and their dependents an opportunity to choose to continue group health benefits provided by the employer's group health plan for a limited amount of time. And the individual would have to pay the entire premium plus an administrative fee. And COBRA usually applies to employers with 20 or more employees. And there are always specific rules and guidelines for COBRA coverage that differ with each plan and each employer. So you need to know your specific rules and guidelines for your specific company plan. HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, protects the unemployed individual by providing a statement that he or she has been covered by a group health plan and is eligible to be covered by a new plan. This way, if the individual has pre-existing conditions, the new employer can be sure that the employee has been covered and health status is not an issue. HIPAA might also allow the individual to buy health insurance if they don't have an opportunity to become covered under a group health insurance plan or if COBRA coverage expires. Now, in the case of a plant closing or a layoff, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, or WARN Act, requires employers with 100 or more employees to provide at least 60 calendar days advance written notice of a plant closing and mass layoff that will affect 50 or more employees at a single site. There are some exceptions, mostly in cases of emergencies and natural disasters. So if you're hit by a tornado or a hurricane, of course, you're exempt from giving 60 days advance notice. But if there's a planned closing or layoff and you fit the criteria with 100 workers, that this is going to affect 50 workers at a single site, you do need to plan to give that 60-day notice. WARN was legislated so that separated employees might have advance notice of prospective job loss and, of course, have a better chance to find other jobs. WARN does specify that both hourly and salaried employees must be notified, as well as employees' representatives. For example, if you have union employees, you need to notify the union representatives. And you also need to notify local elected officials. And you need to notify your state unemployment agencies. The Department of Labor administers WARN, but there is no penalty imposed by the Department of Labor in cases where notice was not given. However, some states have their own dislocated worker laws. So do check with your state before you plan any plant closing or layoff. Now, here come those exciting tables that I promised earlier. You may want to be prepared to snag a screenshot of these slides when your state comes up. There are slides for both voluntary and involuntary terminations for all states. Of course, when termination results at the employer's decision, that, of course, is involuntary on the employee's part. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi have no rule regarding when the final pay is to be issued in involuntary terminations. 23 states stipulate that final pay must be paid on the next regular payday, and all the other states have varying rules. I'll go through these slides slowly enough for you to get a screenshot. Here's the slide for involuntary termination deadlines for Alabama through the District of Columbia. Here's Florida through Indiana. Iowa through Montana. Nebraska through Ohio. Oklahoma through Utah. And Vermont through Wyoming. And when the employee voluntarily resigns, the deadlines are a little bit different. 7 states have no provision at all. 41 states say pay it on the next regular payday, and the other states vary from immediately to other rules. Here are those tables. Alabama through the District of Columbia. Florida through Indiana. Iowa through Missouri. Montana through Ohio. Oklahoma through Utah. And Vermont through Wyoming. Now, these tables are all in the American Payroll Association's payroll source book, and this information can also be obtained on the different states. If you didn't capture a screenshot of your state, you can also get it from me, of course, your software support rep, so just let any of us know and we'll get that to you if you need that. But those are the different tables for voluntary and involuntary deadlines for getting that final pay to your terminated employees. There are some differences. Be sure you're familiar with your state rules because the penalties can really add up once you start accumulating penalties. If you do accumulate penalties, it's not just the penalties. You can incur penalties that include attorney fees and court costs and things like that. So it adds up quickly if penalties do start accumulating. So you really want to be sure that you're in compliance with all of those deadlines. I told you those were exciting. We want to thank you for joining us today. We hope you've learned some tips about termination and severance pay. And we want to remind you to please be on the lookout for more of our educational webinars coming soon. And we hope that you have an optimum day. Thanks, everybody.